Your house is lying to you. On paper, it looks like the biggest check mark in your net worth column. It is likely the most expensive thing you will ever sign your name to. And for decades, we have been told it is the ultimate ticket to a secure retirement. But there is a very good chance that, mathematically speaking, your primary residence is actually a liability masquerading as an asset. I do not mean that in a philosophical way. I mean that if you run the raw numbers on cash flow over a flaky timeline.
That sounds heretical, I know, but the math does not care about the American dream or the picket fence. It only cares about returns.
Today, we are going to strip away the emotion and look at the cold, hard amortization tables to answer the single most expensive question. And before we open up the spreadsheets, I want to be clear that I am not telling you to live in a cardboard box.
I am telling you to understand the price tag of your choices. Most people sleepwalk into a 30-year mortgage because it is just what you do. But if you want to actually build wealth, you need to treat your housing like an investment analyst treats a stock. That is what we do on this channel. We take the emotion out of money so you can keep more of it. If that sounds like a decent return on your time, go ahead and subscribe. It helps the channel, and it might just save you a few $100,000 in interest payments over the next decade. Now, to solve this, we have to look at what actually happens to your money over 30 years, when you buy versus when you rent. The results are usually not what people expect.
Let's start by destroying the binary. Calling a house an asset or a liability is a bit like asking if a car is a tool or a toy. It is usually both.
The most accurate way to view your primary residence is as a consumption good that has a forced savings account attached to it.
When you buy a hamburger, that is pure consumption. You eat it, the value is gone.
When you buy a stock, that is pure investment. You do not touch it, and it hopefully grows. A house sits awkwardly in the middle. You consume it every day by living in it, engaging in wear and tear, but unlike the hamburger, you can sell the leftovers 30 years later.
The problem arises when people confuse the consumption part with the investment part. They justify buying a home that is way over their budget by telling themselves it is an investment.
But if you buy a massive house with 5 bedrooms for 2 people, you are not investing more, you are consuming more.
You are paying to heat, cool, and tax empty space. That is not wealth building. That is just lifestyle inflation wrapped in a mortgage deed. Serious financial planners categorize the house as a use asset, meaning its primary value is utility, not cash flow.
Let's look at the cash flow definition again, because this is where people get hurt.
Kiyosaki's definition that an asset puts money in your pocket is aggressive, but it is useful for your monthly budget.
When you sign a mortgage, you are creating a minimum fixed cost for the next 360 months. If you lose your job, that liability does not care. It still demands payment.
If the local market crashes, that liability does not shrink. You still owe the full amount. This is why I tend to side with the cash flow definition when you are in the building phase of wealth.
If you have $1 million in net worth, but $900,000 of it is trapped in the drywall of your house, you are technically a millionaire, but you are financially fragile. You cannot buy groceries with your front porch. You cannot pay for a medical emergency with your master bedroom.
Until you sell the place, that equity is imaginary money. It is a number on a screen that you have to pay property taxes on. So, for the purpose of your financial freedom date, I prefer to treat the primary residence as a liability that eventually, hopefully, becomes neutral. The psychology here is tricky, because housing is emotional. We do not fall in love with a stock portfolio. We do not picture our kids growing up in a mutual fund.
But we do picture them in the backyard of that colonial with the white shutters. This emotion blinds us to the carrying costs. When you rent, your expense is capped. The rent is the maximum you will pay that month. When you own, the mortgage is just the minimum you will pay. There is always something else. The water heater blows up, the roof leaks, the insurance premium jumps 20% because of a storm 3 states away. Homeowners rarely factor these irregular costs into their return on investment. They just say, I bought it for $400,000 and sold. We tend to remember the sale price and forget the maintenance price. It is a selective memory that makes real estate look like a much better investment than it actually is. So, here is the rule of thumb before we get to the math. Stop calling your home your retirement plan. It is not a pension. It is a place to live that acts as a savings account with really high fees. If you view it that way, you make better decisions. You stop overextending yourself for the dream home and start looking for the efficient home. You realize that every dollar you tie up in home equity is a dollar that is not compounding in the global stock market. The goal is to keep your housing costs, whether you rent or buy, low enough that you can still shovel money into actual cash-flowing assets. The structure itself is an asset. The mortgage is a liability, and the carrying costs are an expense. Your job is to minimize the liability and the expense, so the asset has a chance to actually work for you. Now, let's run a specific scenario to see how this plays out over 30 years. To make this concrete, let's look at a standard 30-year timeline. We are going to compare 2 people. One buys, one rents. Let's say the house costs 400,000 euros, or dollars. The currency doesn't matter, the math is the same. Our buyer puts 20% down, which is 80,000. They take out a 320,000 mortgage at 4% fixed for 30 years. Their monthly principal and interest payment is roughly 1,528. But that is not the real cost. We have to add property tax, insurance, and maintenance. A conservative estimate is about 1% of the home's value per year for maintenance, plus taxes. Let's call the total all-in cost roughly 1,928 a month. Now, our renter. They find a similar place for 1,600 a month. And here is the critical part. The renter takes that 80,000 down payment and puts it into a low-cost global index fund instead. They also take the monthly difference, the 328 savings between buying and renting, and invest that too. This is the only honest way to compare them. If the renter just spends the difference on cars and vacations, the homeowner wins by default because the mortgage forces them to save. But we are assuming both people are disciplined. Before we see who wins, I need to show you something that banks love and homeowners ignore. It's called the amortization curve. Most people think that if they pay $1,500 a month, they are paying off $1,500 of debt. That is completely wrong. In the first few years of a mortgage, the vast majority of your payment is just interest. It is profit for the bank. You are barely touching the principal loan balance. You are effectively renting the money from the bank to rent the house from the previous owner. It takes roughly 14 to 15 years of payments before the majority of your check actually goes toward your own equity. If you move every 5 to 7 years, which is the average for many families, you are resetting this clock over and over again. You are perpetually paying mostly interest and never building real wealth. This is the trap. Let's fast forward 30 years. Our homeowner has paid off the mortgage. They own the house free and clear. Assuming a modest appreciation rate of 3.5%, That 400,000 house is now worth about 1.1 million nominally. That sounds amazing. They turned 80,000 into over $1 million. But wait, we have to look at what they actually paid. Over 30 years, they paid the purchase price, plus about $230,000 in mortgage interest. They also paid tens of thousands in taxes and insurance, and likely another $100,000 in maintenance and repairs over 3 decades. When you subtract all those outflows from the final value, the internal rate of return drops significantly. It is still positive, usually around 4 or 5% real return if you are lucky. But it is not the lottery ticket people think it is. The house forced them to save, yes, but it also forced them to spend heavily on upkeep. The return on equity looks good only because of leverage, using the bank's money. But leverage cuts both ways. If the market stays flat, that leverage destroys your net worth. And remember, during these 30 years, that equity was trapped. They couldn't spend it. It was illiquid. Now look at the renter. They started with $80,000 in the stock market. They added $300 a month. Historically, the S&P 500 or a global index has returned about 10% nominal or 7% real after inflation. Over 30 years, the power of compounding at 7% is absolutely massive. That $80,000 initial investment grows into nearly $600,000 on its own. The monthly contributions add another $300,000 or $400,000. By year 30, the renter has a liquid portfolio worth over $1 million. And here is the kicker. They didn't have to fix a single toilet. They didn't pay for a new roof. They could move whenever they wanted. While the homeowner ends up with a paid-off house worth $1.1 million, the renter ends up with a portfolio worth roughly the same. The difference is liquidity. The renter can sell 4% of their portfolio to live on. The homeowner cannot sell their bathroom to buy groceries. There was a study done by Middleburg that simulated this across multiple U.S. metro areas. Their finding was fascinating. They found that in many expensive markets, renters who actually invested the difference ended up wealthier than the buyers. The key phrase there is, invested the difference. If you rent and spend the savings on lifestyle, you lose. Renting is only a superior wealth strategy if you have the discipline to automate that investment every single month. But mathematically, the study showed that buying is not the slam dunk winner. In high price-to-rent ratios, where houses are expensive compared to rents, the stock market usually beats the housing market over a 30-year run. The takeaway here is that your primary residence is a forced savings vehicle that usually underperforms stocks. It is a hedge against homelessness, not a rocket ship to wealth. If you want high returns, look at businesses and equities. If you want forced savings and stability, look at housing. But there is a missing piece to this puzzle. If stocks beat real estate, why are so many old people rich because of their homes? It comes down to a concept economists call imputed rent. This is the hidden dividend of home ownership that never shows up on a bank statement. If you ignore this, you are missing half the equation. It explains why a house that barely beats inflation can still stabilize your. Imputed rent is the rent you pay to yourself. When you buy a house, you are essentially becoming your own landlord. Instead of paying $1,800 to a stranger, you pay the costs of the house, and in exchange, you get shelter. The value of that shelter is the dividend. And unlike a stock dividend, it is tax-free. You do not pay income tax on the rent you save by living in your own home. This is a massive advantage. Furthermore, that imputed rent acts as an inflation hedge. If you are a renter, your landlord will likely raise the rent every year to match inflation or market demand. Over 30 years, a $1,600 rent could easily belong to $4,000 or $5,000 a month just due to inflation. But if you have a fixed-rate mortgage, your principal and interest payment is locked in 2024 dollars. It never goes up. By year 20, your mortgage payment will feel incredibly cheap compared to the prevailing rents. This is the nuanced view. The house is a shield against inflation. The stock portfolio is the engine for growth. You generally want both. The other psychological benefit is the forced savings aspect we touched on earlier. Humans are terrible at saving money voluntarily. If I give you the choice to put $500 into a stock account or spend it on a new TV, you will often buy the TV. But if the bank says, pay the mortgage or we take your house, you find the money, you pay it. Every month, a portion of that payment pays down the loan, building equity. It is automatic wealth accumulation. For the average person who lacks the discipline to stare at a spreadsheet and invest surplus cash every month, the mortgage is a behavioral hack. It forces you to build net worth. It is not the most efficient way to do it, but it is an effective way. A suboptimal strategy that you stick to is better than an optimal strategy that you quit.
For many, the house is the only savings account that they cannot easily raid for a vacation.
However, we must address the danger of being house rich and cash poor. I see this all the time. A couple retires with a $2 million home and $50,000 in their retirement account. They look rich on paper, but they are living on Social Security and eating beans. Then, they cannot spend the hallway. To access that wealth, they have to sell the house, downsize, or take a reverse mortgage. A home is an incredibly illiquid asset. It takes months to sell. It costs 6% in agent fees. You cannot sell one room to pay for a medical bill. This is why financial planners get nervous when your primary residence makes up more than 50% of your net worth. It creates a liquidity crisis waiting to happen. You need financial assets, stocks, bonds, cash, that are separate from your shelter. If all your wealth is in your house, you are not diversified. You are just a highly leveraged real estate speculator who happens to sleep in their investment. So how do we solve this? We use math to create a decision framework. Step 1 is the price-to-rent ratio. If you can rent a similar home for significantly less than the monthly cost of owning, including taxes and maintenance, you should probably rent and invest the difference.
A good rule of thumb is the 5% rule. Multiply the home price by 5% and divide by 12.
That is roughly the monthly unrecoverable cost of owning. Capital costs plus maintenance plus tax. If you can rent for less than that number, renting is mathematically superior. If rent is higher than that number, buying starts to look like the better deal. For example, on a $500,000 home, 5% is $25,000 a year, or about $2,080 a month.
If you can rent that home for $1,500, renting wins. If rent is $2,500, buying wins.
It is a quick and dirty way to strip the emotion out of the price tag. Step 2 is the 10-year rule. Because of the high transaction costs of buying and selling, closing costs, agent fees, transfer taxes, if you plan to move in 3 years, do not buy. You will almost certainly lose money after fees. The break-even point for buying versus renting usually sits around the 5 to 7 year mark. To be safe and to ride out potential market dips, you should plan to stay put for at least 10 years. If you are in a career phase where you might move cities for a promotion, renting is not throwing money away. It is buying you flexibility. That flexibility has immense value. It lets you chase higher income without being anchored by a mortgage. Do not underestimate the ROI of being able to move freely. Step 3 is the affordability cap. Do not let your total housing cost exceed 30% of your gross income. And when I say cost, I mean the mortgage, the tax, the insurance, and the maintenance fund. If you stretch to 40 or 50% because you fell in love with the kitchen island, you are becoming house poor.
You are robbing your future self.
You are diverting cash that should be going into high-growth stock indices and burying it in a low-growth real estate asset.
Remember, the goal is not just to own a home. The goal is to build wealth. If the house prevents you from investing in anything else, it is a liability, plain and simple.
It is a parasite on your financial future. You want a home that is comfortable enough to live in, but cheap enough that you can still max out your retirement accounts.
I can't believe how many coins I've saved up.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's enough for my dreams.
So, is your house an asset or a liability? The answer is, it depends on you.
If you buy a modest home, stay in it for 20 years, and use the fixed housing cost to aggressively invest in the stock market, your home is a fantastic foundation for wealth.
It is a hedge against inflation and a forced savings plan.
But if you buy a mansion you cannot afford, move every 5 years, and count your home equity as your only retirement plan, it is a massive liability.
It is a lifestyle expense that is draining your potential. The math says that for pure return on investment, stocks usually win. But life is not just about ROI. It is about stability, control, and having a place that is yours.
The secret is to balance the two. Own your home, but do not let your home own you.
Treat it as a place to sleep, not a lottery ticket.
If you do that, the asset versus liability debate doesn't matter, because you will be rich either way.
I hope this cleared up the confusion and maybe saved you from a bad decision.
If you are currently debating renting versus buying, run the 5% rule I mentioned. Run the amortization calculator. Don't just listen to your parents or your real estate agent. Listen to the math.
I've put links to some of the calculators and studies I mentioned, like the Middleburg paper, in the description below, so you can check my work.
If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button so the algorithm knows that smart people are watching. And if you want more deep dives into the mechanics of money without the hype, subscribe to the channel. I'm Alex, this is Alex Talks Money, and I will see you in the next one. Remember, financial freedom is not about owning a mansion, but about owning your choices. It's about having the flexibility to live where you want, work where you want, and invest in what truly grows your wealth. Don't let the emotional appeal of homeownership blind you to the cold, hard math. Prioritize liquid assets that compound over time, and view your home as a stable shelter, not a speculative investment. By making informed decisions, you can secure your financial future and truly achieve independence. Take control of your money, understand its mechanics, and build a life where your assets work for you, not the other way around. Start today by evaluating your current housing situation with a critical eye. Use the tools and insights shared in this video to make choices that align with your long-term financial goals, not just short-term emotional desires. Your future self will thank you for it. This is Alex Talks Money, empowering you to make smarter financial decisions. Until next time, keep learning, keep investing, and keep building your true wealth.